Hashtag the most terrifying alien mercenary. I beg you, never make humans angry again. Hashtag part 1, the quiet ones. The station was never quiet. Even in the dead of the night cycle, when the big lights dimmed and most of the shops pulled down their shutters, Velorath 9 hummed. It hummed with the sound of 1,000 machines keeping 10,000 beings alive in the middle of empty space. Pipes moved water. Vents pushed air. Engines held the whole structure in place so it would not drift into the dark. It was a city floating between stars, and like all cities, it never truly slept. Cole Hargrove liked that about it. He sat outside his supply depot on the lower ring, a battered metal chair under him and a worn thermos of coffee in his hands. The lower ring was not a nice place to have a business. The ceiling was low, the lights were always slightly yellow, and the floor had a permanent smell that no amount of cleaning ever fully removed. But the rent was cheap, the foot traffic was steady, and Cole had learned a long time ago that a man could make a decent living in an ugly place if he was patient enough. He was a plain-looking man. Medium height, medium build, brown hair that had started going gray at the temples. He had the kind of face that people looked at and immediately forgot. That was fine with him. He had been running his depot for 4 years now, selling ship parts, food supplies, fuel cells, water filters, and all the small things that kept other people's vessels running. He knew his stock. He knew his prices. He knew his customers. What his customers did not know was that Cole was watching them too. Not in a strange way. Not in the way that made people nervous. He just paid attention. He noticed things. He noticed which Dractary guards showed up early and which ones showed up late. He noticed which merchants were falling behind on their payments to the syndicate and which ones had quietly started carrying weapons they had not carried before. He noticed the small shifts that most people were too busy or too tired to see. Laura Briggs noticed things too. She was his business partner in the sharper half of their operation, though she would have laughed if anyone called her that out loud. She was younger than Cole by about 10 years, with short dark hair and quick eyes that moved over a room the way a mechanic's eyes moved over an engine, looking for what was wrong. She handled their accounts, their shipping schedules, and their communications. She also kept a private log that she had never shown to anyone. The log had entries going back 2 years. Every time a Dractary guard changed their docking fee without notice, she wrote it down. Every time a human merchant reported a cargo going missing after passing through Dractary-controlled inspection, she wrote it down. Every time a human ship was turned away from a berth that had previously been available, she wrote it down. She did not know exactly why she was keeping the log. She told herself it was just good record-keeping. The Dractary were the ones who ran things on the lower ring. They were large beings, reptilian, with thick scales that ran from dark green to almost black depending on the individual. They stood about 2 heads taller than any human and moved with the easy confidence of creatures who had never seriously been challenged. They had been mercenaries and enforcers for 3 centuries before they had become a trade power, and they had never really left that history behind. They still walked like soldiers. They still talked like people who expected to be obeyed. Their commander on Velorath 9 was a Dractary named Vraxis. He was older than most of his guards, with a long scar running down the left side of his jaw and eyes that were almost yellow. He did not shout or threaten in an obvious way. He did not need to. His authority was simply a fact, the way gravity was a fact, and everyone on the lower ring understood it. Vraxis did not like humans. He did not hate them in a passionate way either. He simply did not think very much of them. They were small and soft and had only been in deep space for about 200 years, which, by galactic standards, made them practically infants. They had no great military history out here among the stars. They had no powerful allies. They asked polite questions at trade meetings and filed careful paperwork and smiled at everyone. They were, in Vraxis's professional opinion, completely harmless. He made this clear regularly, in small ways and large ones. On the morning that things began to change, though nobody knew it yet, Vraxis walked into the main trade hall on the lower ring with 4 of his guards behind him. Cole was there, standing at a public terminal, reviewing a cargo manifest for an incoming shipment. The hall was full of merchants from a dozen species, Kethari, Sorvani, a few Mechathite traders with their breathing masks, and a handful of humans spread around the edges of the room like they usually were, not drawing attention to themselves. Vraxis stopped when he saw Cole. He walked over slowly. His guards spread out slightly behind him in the casual way that trained soldiers spread out when they want to remind everyone nearby that they are trained soldiers. Vraxis reached out and took the cargo manifest from Cole's hands. He looked at it for a moment. Then he let it drop. The pages scattered across the floor, sliding under boots and crates, some of them getting stepped on before Cole could reach them. "You are behind on your docking renewal," Vraxis said. Cole crouched and began picking up the pages. "My renewal is not due for another 12 days, he said. His voice was calm. Not forced calm, not trying not to sound scared calm. Just calm. "The fee structure changed this morning," Vraxis said. "You are now behind." A few nearby merchants glanced over and then quickly looked away. This was how it worked. Everyone knew how it worked. You paid, or you found somewhere else to be. Cole gathered the last of his pages and straightened up. He looked at Vraxis. Not up at him, though Vraxis was much taller. Just at him. Eye contact, easy and direct, the way a person looks at something they are not afraid of. "How much is the new fee?" Cole asked. Vraxis told him. It was 3 times the previous rate. Cole nodded slowly. He reached into his jacket, produced a payment card, and settled the amount without argument. Vraxis took the card, processed it, and handed it back with the particular kind of satisfaction that came from an easy win. "You humans are very practical," Vraxis said, and there was a smile in the word practical that made it mean something else entirely. Around the hall, a few of the other alien merchants chuckled quietly. One of the Kethari traders shook his head in a way that was probably meant to be sympathetic but landed closer to pity. Cole put the payment card back in his pocket. He put his manifest pages under his arm. He looked at Vraxis one more time. "All right," he said. Just that one word. Quiet, flat, completely without emotion. Then he turned and walked back toward the lower ring corridor. Laura was waiting for him near the depot entrance. She had watched the whole thing from a distance. When Cole came back, she did not say anything right away. She just looked at his face. His face was the same as always. Neutral. Easy. Unbothered. But Laura had known Cole for 6 years. She had worked beside him in 3 different star systems. She knew the difference between a man who was fine and a man who had made a decision. She had seen that expression once before, a long time ago, in a very different situation, and she knew exactly what it meant. She picked up her own thermos and took a slow drink. "Cole," she said quietly. "I know," he said. She nodded. She did not say anything else. She went back inside, sat down at her desk, and opened her private log. She did not add a new entry. She just read back through it from the beginning, all 2 years of it, and made sure everything was in the right order. Outside in the corridor, the station hummed around them the same as always. And nobody noticed that anything had changed. Hashtag the most terrifying alien mercenary, I beg you, never make humans angry again. Hashtag part 2, what they left behind on Earth. Sorvith had a small office. He liked it that way. A desk, a chair, a screen, and one small plant that he watered every 3 days because his doctor had told him he needed something living nearby to reduce stress. The plant was doing fine. Sorvith was less sure about himself. He was an analyst with the Kethra Intelligence Bureau, which meant his job was to look at information and decide how dangerous it was. Most of the time, the answer was not very. Most of the time, he wrote tidy reports that nobody senior ever fully read, filed them correctly, and went home to his apartment where the plant was not his only company but was certainly his most reliable. The assignment to assess humanity had arrived on a slow morning. A minor diplomatic incident, some trade dispute on a station at the edge of Kethra space, had prompted his supervisor to request a standard threat evaluation. Humanity. Level of danger to Kethra interests. Expected to be brief. Expected to be boring. Sorvith began the way he always did. He pulled the standard public file on human civilization. It was thin. 2 centuries of space travel. 1 colony war of limited scale. No major alliances. No recorded conflict with any species above Class 3 standing. Trade presence growing but unremarkable. The file used words like developing and emerging and foundational stage, which were all polite ways of saying small and not important yet. He was about to begin writing his summary when something made him stop. It was a small thing. In the footnotes of the public file, there was a reference to a restricted historical archive. The archive was labeled simply Earth Internal Records, Pre-Contact Era. Sorvith had clearance for it. He had just never had a reason to open it before. He opened it now. He started reading. 3 hours later, he was still reading. His tea had gone cold. The plant sat quietly on the corner of the desk. Sorvith did not notice either of these things. The archive was full of human history from before they had left their own solar system. Wars, mostly. An extraordinary number of wars for a species on a single planet. Sorvith had studied dozens of civilizations, and he had never encountered a species that had fought itself so continuously, so creatively, and with such enormous scale. There was a period of roughly 2,000 years, by the human calendar, where barely a generation passed without some portion of the population attempting to destroy another portion. Not territorial skirmishes. Not resource conflicts that lasted a season. Organized, sustained, industrialized destruction carried out over years and decades. He found a record of something called the Second World War. He read it carefully. Then he read it again. Then he went and refilled his tea and came back and read it a third time. What struck him was not the scale of the violence, though the scale was remarkable. What struck him was the human response to losing. Again and again in that war, a side that had suffered catastrophic defeats, that had lost cities and armies and territory, had simply refused to stop. Not out of tactical advantage. Not because they had resources left that made sense to spend. Out of something the records described only as will or refusal or the human spirit, which were all different words for a thing Sorvith did not have a clean translation for in his own language. He found a quote from a human leader of that era. The leader had stood before a chamber of officials in a city that was being bombed from the air every night and said something that Sorvith read 4 times in a row. The leader had said, in plain words, that they would never give up. Not after a year. Not after 10 years. Not if the last man was still standing. The language was simple. The meaning was absolute. Sorvith saved the quote. He labeled it important and then sat back in his chair and thought for a long time. He kept reading. He read about a concept called total war, which was a term humans used for when they had decided to stop holding anything back. He read about what happened to the economies, the industries, the entire social structures of human nations when they shifted into this mode. They converted everything. Factories that made household goods started making weapons within months. Civilian populations accepted hardship on a level that would have caused revolutions in most species he had studied. They rationed food. They worked longer hours. They sent their young to die in enormous numbers, and somehow, they kept going. He read about human soldiers specifically. He found medical records describing individuals who had continued fighting after injuries that would have ended any member of his own species. He found accounts of groups that were surrounded on all sides with no route of escape who had decided that this was not actually a problem but rather a tactical opportunity. He found a recorded statement from a human military officer who, upon being told that his unit was completely encircled by a far larger enemy force, had reportedly said that this meant the enemy could now be attacked from any direction. Sorvith stared at that for a long time. He moved forward in the archive, into the later centuries. He found the nuclear period, where humans had built weapons capable of ending all life on their planet and had then spent the better part of a century pointing those weapons at each other across a tense and fragile peace. He found records of that period described as a balance of terror, which was a phrase he found extraordinary. They had kept peace not through trust or shared values but through the mutual understanding that if one side moved, both sides died. And somehow that had worked. 4 decades. He found the resource wars of the 22nd century. He found the period of climate collapse and recovery. He found records of a species that had pushed its own world nearly to the point of breaking, had watched the damage accumulate for generations, and had then pulled back from the edge through a combination of desperate engineering, political will, and what the records described as the stubbornness of a species that had survived too much to give up on its home planet. By this point, Sorvith had been in his office for 6 hours. He decided to do something he did not normally do for a standard threat assessment. He requested an in-person interview with a human source. The man who came to meet him 3 days later was named Grant Holloway. He was old by human standards, with white hair and a slow, careful way of moving. He had served in the Mars conflict of 2241 and had retired with a long list of military honors that Sorvith had looked up beforehand and found quietly impressive. He now lived on a residential station nearby and grew tomatoes in a small indoor garden. He brought Sorvith a paper bag of them as a gift. He also brought tea and offered to make some before Sorvith could offer to make any. Sorvith had prepared careful questions. Neutral questions. The kind designed to draw out information without signaling what you already knew. Grant answered every question in a pleasant, easy voice. He talked about the Mars conflict the way a person talked about a difficult job they had once held, not with pride exactly, and not with regret, but with the matter-of-fact tone of someone describing something that had simply happened and had needed to be handled. He described tactical decisions that, to Sorvith's careful ear, were clearly what other species would call war crimes and Grant called necessary adjustments. He said this while pouring the tea with a steady hand. At one point Sorvith asked, carefully, what Grant thought the most important quality in a soldier was. Grant thought about it for a moment. Patience, he said. Knowing when to wait and when to move. Most people move too soon because they're afraid of what waiting means. The good ones learn to be comfortable being still. He smiled. He offered Sorvith a tomato. After Grant left, Sorvith sat alone with his notes for a long time. Then he pulled up his threat assessment form. He looked at the blank field where he was supposed to type threat level. The standard options were negligible, low, moderate, elevated, and critical. He sat there for 4 full minutes. Then he typed negligible, because that was what his supervisor was expecting and because he had no concrete evidence of any current threat. He filed the report. He submitted it. He watched it disappear into the system. Then he opened a new file. A private one, encrypted, stored somewhere only he could reach. He began typing everything he actually thought. He typed for a long time. When he was done, he sat back. He looked at the plant. The plant looked back at him in the quiet way that plants did. He picked up his comm and called a colleague he trusted. I need you to look into something, he said quietly. I need to know what humans do when they stop being polite. There was a pause on the other end. That's an odd question, his colleague said. I know, said Sorvith. Find out anyway. Hashtag the most terrifying alien mercenary, I beg you, never make humans angry again. Hashtag part 3, the spark. The message came in at the start of the morning cycle. It was a Dracthery broadcast, sent on open channels across the entire sector, which meant they wanted everyone to hear it. The message was clean and direct, the way Dracthery communications usually were. They had seized a human colony freighter called the Ardent Crossing. 42 crew members were now being held in cargo bays in Dracthery-controlled space. The ship and its crew would be returned when the Galactic Trade Authority formally recognized Dracthery ownership of all human-operated shipping lanes in the Kethra sector. They expected negotiation. They had done this before with other species. There would be meetings. There would be delays. There would be a slow back and forth where the Dracthery slowly got most of what they wanted and the other side slowly accepted that this was simply how things worked when you were smaller and weaker. It was a clean process. Everyone understood their roles. Laura heard the broadcast in the depot, standing over her desk with her tea halfway to her mouth. She set the tea down carefully. She did not spill it. She pulled up the full text of the message on her screen and read it twice. Then she went to the doorway between the main depot and the back storage room, where Cole was checking a crate of replacement fuel cells. She did not say anything. She just looked at him. Cole looked back. Then he crossed the room and read the message himself. He read it once. He nodded once, very slightly, the way a person nodded when something they had been expecting had finally arrived. All right, he said. That word again. Laura had been thinking about it for weeks, ever since the day in the trade hall. She understood it now. It was not a surrender. It was not acceptance. It was a line being crossed over quietly in the mind, a decision being made without any drama attached to it. It was the sound of a person putting something down that they had been carrying for a long time. Cole went to his personal comm. He made 3 calls. The calls were short. Mostly he listened. When he was done, he looked at Laura. How complete is the log? He asked. Complete enough, she said. Good. Start getting it ready. I'll need it later. She went back to her desk and opened the log. She had been keeping it for over 2 years. It was thorough. Every extorted fee, documented. Every cargo that had gone missing, documented. Every human merchant on Velorath 9 who had been pushed off a berth, overcharged, threatened, or quietly forced out of a route, all of it was there, neat and precise, with dates and times and the names of the Dracthery officials involved. She had told herself it was just good record keeping. She understood now what it actually was. While she worked, Cole walked out of the depot and moved through the lower ring corridors. He stopped at a repair bay 3 units down where a man named Pete Calloway was fixing a coolant line on a small transport ship. Pete was tall and thin, with grease-stained hands and a quiet, unhurried way about him. He had been the station's primary mechanical maintenance worker for 6 years and knew every pipe, every conduit, and every power relay in the lower ring better than anyone alive. Cole told Pete what had happened. Pete listened without interrupting. When Cole finished, Pete wiped his hands on a cloth and looked at the floor for a moment. "When?" Pete asked. "Tonight," Cole said. "Night cycle." Quietly. Pete nodded. He went back to the coolant line. He did not look worried. Cole kept moving. He went to the docking bays and found a young woman named Diane Rourke who worked loading cargo. He found a pair of human traders named Ben Schaefer and Carl Dutton who shared a berthing slip 1 level up. He found a human engineer named Nina Walsh who worked for one of the Kethari shipping firms. He found every human on Velorath 9 one by one, and he spoke to each of them quietly, and each time the conversation was short and calm and ended with a nod. He did not call a meeting. He did not make a speech. There was no announcement. By the time the night cycle began and the big lights dimmed to their low amber glow, every human on Velorath 9 was gone. Not fled. Not evacuated in a panic. Gone the way a tide went out, smoothly, completely, without a sound. Ships undocked from their berths in a staggered sequence over the course of 4 hours, each one filing the correct departure notice, each one citing a different routine reason. Equipment issue. Scheduled maintenance. Family matter. Contract transfer. Nothing that triggered any flag. Nothing that looked like anything other than ordinary business. The station did not notice immediately. It was a big place, and 1 or 2 ships leaving in the night cycle was normal. 5 ships leaving was unusual but not alarming. By the time the morning cycle lights came up and someone on the station management team looked at the docking register, there were no human ships left at Velorath 9 at all. The absence was strange. The station staff filed it as a coincidence. Then the first water recycler failed. Then the second one. By midday, 3 water recyclers were down, 2 power conduits had dropped to half output, and the food synthesis network on the lower ring was producing a persistent error code that nobody could find the source of. Maintenance crews were dispatched. They found the machines in good condition, no obvious breakdowns, no damage, no clear reason for the failures. What they found, after several frustrated hours, was that the systems had been running on a maintenance schedule and a set of calibration protocols that had been managed almost entirely by human workers. The protocols were still there. The humans who had built them and adjusted them every day were not. Nobody had asked them to maintain those systems. Nobody had formally assigned them those roles. Over years of living and working on the station, they had simply seen things that needed doing and done them, quietly, without drawing attention to themselves. Pete Calloway alone had been keeping 4 major systems running on improvised repairs that technically should have failed months ago. On the upper ring, the Dracthery officials were not yet concerned. They were watching the Galactic Trade Authority for a response to their broadcast. The GTA was slow, which was expected. There would be an emergency session. There would be statements. There would be a drawn-out process. What arrived instead was a single document, filed through the correct channels, stamped, formatted perfectly, and submitted without delay by the Human Colonial Authority. It was a requisition form. 6 pages long. The first 5 pages were a detailed formal request for the authorized retrieval of unlawfully detained human citizens and the protection of registered human commercial interests. The language was precise and polite and left no room for argument. The last page was where a junior GTA aide, assigned to review the document as part of standard processing, stopped and sat down. He had been about to move it along to the next desk when he reached the final paragraph. It was an addendum, quiet and plain, requesting formal authorization for what it called the deployment of human reclamation assets. The aide did not know what that term meant. He searched the database. The database returned results. He did not return to the meeting he had left. He was found 40 minutes later sitting in a side corridor with his datapad held loosely in his hands and his eyes focused on nothing in particular. When a colleague asked if he was all right, he looked up and said, in a very flat voice, "I think we should let them have the shipping lanes." Nobody understood what he meant. Nobody asked him to explain. Back in Dractary space, the Ardent Crossing sat in its bay. The crew was tired and frightened and growing more hungry than the rations allowed for, but they were alive. In the cargo bay where they were being held, a man named Aaron Busby sat against the wall with his knees up and his arms resting on them and looked at the ceiling. He had been on the ship for 9 years. He knew Cole Hargrove by name and by reputation. He had met the man twice at docking stations and found him unremarkable both times. He thought about that now, in the quiet of the cargo bay. Then he thought about how Cole had said almost nothing on both occasions but had noticed everything. Aaron looked at the ceiling for a long time. Then, for the first time since the seizure, he smiled. "All right, Cole," he said quietly to no one in particular. "Whenever you're ready. Hashtag the most terrifying alien mercenary, I beg you, never make humans angry again. Hashtag part 4, what humans are when they are serious." Vraxis was in his command room when the sensor alert came in. He was reviewing route projections for the new shipping lanes, a task he found straightforward and satisfying. The Ardent Crossing situation had gone exactly as planned. The GTA had been slow to respond, which was normal. No human force had mobilized, which was expected. The species did not have a significant military presence in this sector, and what they did have was spread thin across distant colony routes. There was no reason for concern. So when the alert sounded and one of his officers told him a single ship had dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the sector, Vraxis did not stand up from his chair. "One ship," he said. "One ship," the officer confirmed. Vraxis looked at the readout. The vessel was small. Human configuration. No military markings. No visible weapons systems active. It was moving at a calm, unhurried pace, not aggressive, not evasive. Just coming in steady and direct, the way a delivery vessel approached a dock. He ordered a hail. The response came quickly, which surprised him. Most species took a moment when hailed by a Dractary fleet. They needed that moment to compose themselves, to find the right tone, to decide how frightened they wanted to sound. This response came in almost immediately, as if the person on the other end had been sitting at their comm waiting for it. The face on the screen was a man Vraxis recognized. Medium height. Brown hair going gray. A worn thermos sitting on the console beside him. The human merchant from Velorath, 9. The one who paid his fees without complaint. Cole Hargrove introduced himself as a civilian contractor attached to the Human Colonial Authority's Office of Citizen Recovery. He explained that he was present on behalf of the 42 crew members of the Ardent Crossing. He said he would like them released. He asked Vraxis, politely, if that could be arranged. Vraxis stared at the screen for a moment. Then he smiled. In Dractary expression, a smile meant something close to what it meant in humans, and Vraxis's smile now was the kind that preceded something unpleasant. "You came alone," Vraxis said. "I came with enough," Cole said. "One ship," Vraxis said. "To my sector. To demand the return of our leverage." He leaned forward slightly. "I want you to understand what I am about to do to your vessel." "I understand you're considering it," Cole said. "I'd ask you to take 30 seconds before you give the order." "And why would I do that?" "Professional courtesy," Cole said. Vraxis gave the order. Every weapon system on every Dractary ship in the sector went dark at the same moment. Not from an attack. There was no flash, no impact, no warning signal. The system simply stopped. Targeting arrays showed blank screens. Launch controls returned errors. Point defense grids went offline and stayed offline. Vraxis's officers began talking over each other in fast, clipped voices, running diagnostics, rerunning diagnostics, trying manual overrides that did nothing. Vraxis sat very still. 3 light-years away, in a relay station that appeared on no Dractary navigation chart, Laura Briggs sat at a terminal she had been building in her spare time for the past 14 months. The terminal was connected to a network of access threads she had been quietly threading into Dractari military infrastructure since the first week the Dractari had started harassing human merchants on Velorath 9. Not aggressively. Not in a way that triggered any security flag. She had moved slowly, one small thread at a time, patient the way water was patient with stone. She had mapped the entire Dractari military communication and weapons network in this sector. She had not told Cole because Cole had not asked. She had built it because she was good at her job and because she had learned a long time ago that the most useful preparations were the ones nobody knew about. She took a slow sip of tea and kept her hands on the terminal. Back in the sector, Cole watched the readouts on his console shift as Laura's work took hold. He did not smile. He did not look relieved. His expression was the same as it always was. Then 14 ships appeared. They did not arrive with any particular drama. One moment the sensor screens showed empty space around the Dractari fleet. The next moment they did not. 14 human warships sat in a containment formation so precise it looked like it had been drawn by hand. They were lean vessels, dark-hulled, with none of the decorative elements that most spacefaring species put on their military ships. No insignia. No visible ceremonial features. Just function, clean and complete, surrounding the Dractari fleet on every approach vector simultaneously. They did not fire. They just sat there. A channel opened from the lead vessel. The woman who appeared on screen was named Commander Nora Vance. She was not a large person. She had close-cropped brown hair, a calm face, and the manner of someone who had been awake for a long time and was not bothered by it. She did not raise her voice. She spoke at a steady, even pace, the way a person spoke when they had given a difficult explanation before and had learned how to make it land cleanly. She told Vraxis exactly what was going to happen in the next 4 hours. The crew of the Ardent Crossing would be moved to the forward bay of their own ship. The ship would be released on its original course. Any attempt to delay, to harm the crew, or to power any weapon system would trigger a response from the surrounding vessels that Vraxis would not find preferable. She described what that response would look like in specific terms, quietly, without any emotional emphasis. She then told him what would happen after the 4 hours if he chose not to cooperate. She described that too, in the same voice, at the same pace. Then she said she hoped they would be able to resolve the situation without additional difficulty, and she closed the channel. There was silence on the Dractari command deck. Vraxis sat very still. He looked at the sensor readings. 14 ships. Every weapon system dark. A network intrusion so deep it had reached parts of his infrastructure he had not personally accessed in years. One human ship sitting at the center of it all, still moving at its unhurried pace, with a man holding a thermos of coffee on the other end of the comm. He thought about what Nora Vance had described. He thought about her tone. He had faced threats before. He had been threatened by species with larger fleets, louder voices, more obvious power. None of them had ever sounded like that. The absence of emotion in her voice was not coldness. It was something else. Something he did not have a precise word for. He thought about the one ship arriving alone. He thought about the 30 seconds Cole had asked for. He thought about how the intrusion into his weapon systems had happened before any aggressive move had been made, which meant it had been ready long before this moment, which meant it had been planned long before this moment, which meant all of this had been prepared while he had been laughing at a human merchant for paying his fees without complaint. He gave the order. Aaron Busby was sitting against the cargo bay wall when he heard the locks disengage. The door slid open and 2 Dractari guards gestured them out without making eye contact. The crew of the Ardent Crossing moved through the corridors of the vessel in silence, not quite believing it, not wanting to say anything in case saying something changed it. They reached their ship. The bay doors were open. The Ardent Crossing was right there, exactly as they had left it. Cole was standing at the entrance, thermos in hand. He had come across personally in a small transit pod once the handoff was confirmed. He looked at Aaron. He looked at the rest of the crew. He scanned their faces the way a person scanned a list, checking each one. "Anyone seriously hurt?" he asked. "Tired and hungry," Aaron said. "But no. No, we're all right." Cole nodded. He held out a second thermos to Aaron. Aaron took it and discovered it was hot coffee, and he could not entirely explain why that nearly broke him open right there. "Commander Vance," Cole said into his comm, "we have everyone. We're heading home." Nora Vance's voice came back, easy and clear. Understood. Safe flight. The 14 ships did not celebrate. They simply began their own departure, moving smoothly out of formation and into their transit vectors. Laura, from her relay station, began withdrawing her network threads from the Dractary systems in the careful, unhurried way she had put them in. Cole guided the Ardent crossing out of Dractary space without looking back. In the Dractary command room, Vraxis sat alone for a long time after every screen had gone quiet. He had won 100 confrontations in his career. He knew what a win felt like and he knew what a loss felt like. He also knew, with a clarity that sat heavy in his chest, what it felt like to understand that you had never actually been in control of a situation that you believed you were in control of. He sat with that for a long time. He did not say anything. There was nothing useful to say. # the most terrifying alien mercenary, I beg you, never make humans angry again. # part 5, I beg you, never make humans angry again. The neutral station was called Mira Point. It was a small place, clean and unremarkable, chosen specifically because neither side had any history there. The meeting room had plain walls, a plain table, and 2 plain chairs facing each other. There were no flags, no insignia, no decoration of any kind. The room looked like somewhere you went when you wanted to talk without anyone watching. Sorvith arrived first. He set his datapad on the table and folded his hands over it and waited. The Dractary who came through the door 3 minutes later was not Vraxis. Vraxis had been quietly reassigned following the incident, which in Dractary organizational terms meant he was being held responsible for an outcome that had embarrassed the Syndicate. The senior commander who sat across from Sorvith now was named Hekrath. He was older than Vraxis, with heavier scales and a careful, deliberate way of moving. He had not personally been part of the Ardent Crossing situation, which was probably why he had been sent. He was clean of it. He was here to understand it. He looked at Sorvith without hostility. He was not the kind of being who started a meeting with hostility. He was the kind who waited until he knew what he was dealing with. You requested this meeting, Hekrath said. I did, Sorvith said. I wanted to speak with someone from your command structure before you made any further decisions regarding human interests in this sector. And you thought you had something useful to tell us. I think I have something necessary to tell you, Sorvith said. Whether it is useful depends on whether you are willing to hear it. Hekrath was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. Sorvith opened his datapad. He had organized everything carefully over the past 2 weeks, since the incident had resolved itself and he had pulled his encrypted private file back out and added the new material to it. He had the Human History Archive. He had his notes from the interview with Grant Holloway. He had the full text of the Human Colonial Authority's 6-page requisition form, including the final addendum. He had Commander Nora Vance's mission debrief, which had been obtained through proper intelligence channels and which read, in its entirety, in the tone of a person describing a task that had been routine. He started at the beginning. He described what he had found in the historical archive. He walked Hekrath through the wars, the recoveries, the total war doctrine, the nuclear standoff, the centuries of self-inflicted damage that somehow had not destroyed the species. He talked slowly and clearly, using plain language wherever he could, because he had found in his career that plain language made difficult things land harder, not softer. Hekrath listened without interrupting. His face was composed. He was a professional, and professionals did not show their reactions during a briefing. But Sorvith had spent 30 years reading faces, and he watched the small shifts, the slight tension around the eyes during the nuclear period material, the stillness that came over Hekrath when Sorvith described the concept of total war. Sorvith moved on to Grant Holloway. He described the old veteran's apartment, the tomatoes, the careful pleasant voice, the way Grant had talked about catastrophic decisions as necessary adjustments. He read back some of his direct notes from the interview, not quoting, he was careful not to quote, but describing in his own words what Grant had conveyed and what had been, in his professional assessment, deeply unusual about it. Then he talked about Laura Briggs. He had not known her name until after the incident. He had obtained her file as part of the standard intelligence review that followed. What the file showed was a woman with no military training, no formal intelligence background, and no obvious record of anything beyond running a supply depot account and keeping meticulous business records. What she had built in 14 months, working alone in her spare time, was a network intrusion architecture that a Kethra Bureau team of 8 professionals had estimated would have taken them 2 years to construct. She had done it quietly, correctly, without any authorization or instruction from anyone, simply because she had seen it might eventually be needed. Hekrath was still. Very still. Sorvith laid out the rest of it. The night departure from Velorath, 9, every human gone in 4 hours, no panic, no drama, taking with them the quiet knowledge of how to keep 30% of the station running. The 6-page form. The 14 ships that had been nowhere and then everywhere simultaneously. Commander Vance's voice on the comm. He pushed the datapad across the table so Hekrath could read the mission debrief himself. He gave Hekrath time to read it. When Hekrath set the pad down, he was quiet for a long moment. They were never afraid of us, he said finally. It was not quite a question. No, said Sorvith. They were not afraid. They were waiting. For what? For a reason. Sorvith paused. They are almost always waiting. It is one of the things that makes them difficult to understand, and more difficult to predict. Most species, when they are in a position of apparent weakness, either submit or they resist visibly. They get loud, or they get small. Humans get quiet. They go still. And while they are still, they are working. Hekrath looked at the datapad. The woman. Briggs. She built that network before anyone had given her a reason to. Yes. She saw that a reason might eventually come. So she prepared. Sorvith folded his hands again. This is consistent throughout their history. They do not always know what they are preparing for. They prepare anyway. It is a survival behavior developed over thousands of years on a planet that was consistently trying to kill them. Hekrath turned something over in his mind. Sorvith could see him doing it. A professional reassessing from the beginning. The merchant, Hekrath said. Hargrove. He had access to 14 warships and a military commander and a network specialist. He was a civilian trader on a lower ring depot. Sorvith agreed. Yes. And he said nothing. For 4 years, he said nothing. He paid the fees. He picked up the papers from the floor. He was waiting for a reason, Sorvith said quietly. The hostage situation was the reason. Everything else had been endured because it could be endured and because responding to it would have cost more than absorbing it. But when the line was crossed, when the Ardent Crossing was taken and 42 people were put in a cargo bay, that was the reason. And everything that had been quietly built and quietly documented and quietly prepared was already in place. Hekrath was silent for a long time. The room was very quiet. Outside, Mira Point hummed with its small ordinary sounds, air circulation, distant footsteps, the low vibration of the station's engine core. How do you negotiate with something like that? Hekrath said. Honestly, said Sorvith. And carefully. And with a clear understanding that there is a line, and that you do not want to be the one who crosses it. He paused. They are not aggressive by nature. Every account I have found supports this. They prefer trade, cooperation, and being left alone to do their work. If you let them do their work, they are excellent partners and extremely reliable. If you push them, they absorb it for a very long time. And when they stop absorbing it, you will not be given a warning. You will simply find out. Hekrath picked up the datapad one more time and looked at Nora Vance's debrief. He read one line near the end, where Vance described the operation as completed without incident. He set the pad down. I will need to take this back to senior command, he said. I know, said Sorvith. I would recommend they read all of it. The meeting ended. Hekrath left first. Sorvith sat alone for a few minutes, the way he often did after difficult conversations, letting the room settle before he stood up. Then he went back to his office on the Kethra Bureau station, made himself a cup of tea, and opened the new report he had been writing since the night the Ardent Crossing had come home. This one was classified at the highest level available to him. He had spent 2 weeks writing and rewriting it, trying to find the right words for what he needed to say. He was almost happy with it now. He wrote the final section that evening. He described humanity as a civilization that had evolved, uniquely among all known species, to survive their own worst impulses. He wrote that most civilizations became dangerous as they grew more powerful. Humans had been dangerous long before they left their own planet. What had changed in 2 centuries of space travel was not their capability. What had changed was simply the context. They were in a larger arena now. The patience they had developed over thousands of years of survival had transferred cleanly. He wrote the final line last, and he wrote it simply, because plain language made difficult things land harder. He wrote, "Do not try to make them afraid. They do not respond to fear the way other species do. If you threaten them and they go quiet, do not mistake the quiet for surrender. If they pay without complaint and say nothing, do not mistake the nothing for acceptance. I have spent months studying this species, and I want any future reader of this report to understand one thing above all else. Never make humans angry. Not because of what they will do in the moment, but because of what they will quietly, carefully, patiently do after they have had enough time to think." He submitted the report. He sat back. He looked at the plant on his desk. Then he picked up his comm and called Sorvatha's trusted colleague from weeks ago. "Remember what I asked you to look into?" "The humans," the colleague said. "I found some things." "I know," Sorvath said. "Me too." 3 weeks later, Cole Hargrove reopened his supply depot on the lower ring of Velorath 9. His docking renewal fee was issued promptly and had returned to its original rate, unprompted, by the station authority. Several alien merchants he passed in the corridor nodded at him with a different kind of look than they had given him before. Not fear exactly. Something closer to the look you gave a deep river that appeared calm on the surface. Respectful. Careful. Cole did not say anything about any of it. He opened his depot, set his thermos on the corner of the counter, and pulled up his incoming shipment manifest. Pete Calloway was down the corridor, back at work on the station's water recyclers, whistling something quiet to himself. Laura sat at her desk. Her private log was closed. She did not feel the need to add anything to it right now. Maybe later. Maybe never. It had done what it needed to do. The station hummed around them. Air moved through the vents. Lights held steady. Everything ran the way it was supposed to run. Cole poured himself a cup of coffee. Everything was quiet.